hoping that everybody is sort of in a team now. We are going to assign the project tomorrow, roughly about a month's duration. There will be details there, so we can get started on that. You're familiar with the LLVM IR, so this will of course based on that and a paper that I'm giving. So it should be pretty interesting to try and do it. Reading the paper, understanding it, and then implementing it. So I won't get into that now, but we can talk about it next class. So let us continue our discussion, and mainly I want to cover today this topic of redundancy as in relationship to the loops, and especially the loop invariant code motion, which is an historic transformation which was there before PRE, and then how the PRE allows us to do this universally based on covering the case of loop invariant code motion and otherwise. So just to refresh ourselves, what exactly is partial redundancy? It's basically this particular example in which we have redundancy if we come into the basic block along a particular edge, one of the edges. And so the expression is available there. You can see B plus C. And this, of course, need not be just generated in the predecessor. It's just for convenience. It's shown here that it is generated in the predecessor. But in general, this could come down on long path generation and surviving the merges and all that on those paths, joins, and remaining available, and could come down all the way here, which basically means that no matter how we have come to this point from the right hand side edge, along whichever path we have come in, we have B plus C evaluated there, and after the B plus C's evaluation, neither B and nor C has been reassigned. So that is the meaning of availability, which is at the heart of redundancy. So this expression is available on the right hand side, and we could have come to this green shaded part of A is equal to B plus C in the lower part, in this join of this basic block, and we could have used the value which we have computed above before we came to this point. So unfortunately, the expression was available along that edge, but you can see on the right hand side, left hand side rather, coming in, it is not available because of the redefinition of B sitting right there in the predecessor basic block. So even though it may be available before this, after this particular point, since B is redefined, it is no longer available. So how could, so this is a case of partially redundant expression, and what it means is we are not able to remove it using the traditional ways of doing available expressions and their elimination for CSE. And so this does occur a lot, especially as you saw earlier in the last lecture, it occurs inside the loop as a loop invariant code, and leads to this particular case of partial redundancy, as you see here in the next slide. What you're seeing here is B plus C is the expression which we are talking about here. And what is going on is, as far as B plus C is concerned, on the entrance of the loop coming from the top, we did not have any evaluation of this expression at all. Okay, at least that's what is shown here. So B is not available on the edge coming from the top to the red arrow there. And however, if you see it, B plus C is evaluated inside the loop, And because of that reason, on the back edge, and neither B or nor C has been changed. And because of this back edge, it is available on the back edge. So again, exactly same case on the forward edge, top down edge, it is not available, and it is available on the back edge. So because of the join there, it is not available along all paths, and therefore it is not available to be eliminated using our traditional techniques. And so this is also partially redundant here. So in addition, you can see here that this B plus C is sort of a loop invariant, so which is a different definition. So what exactly is a loop invariant? You can see that we'll enter this particular loop using certain values of B and C. The B and C values do not change. We may have multiple entry points, join edges into the loop pre-header, but of course that's a single entry point through that basic block. So this is also a single entry loop, and we could have, of course, multiple predecessors to that pre-header along which we could come in with different B and C values, but eventually it is the value of some value of B and C which enters this loop. That value inside the loop, however, never changes. And so because it never changes, B plus C's value remains the same through and through the execution of the loop. And that basically means that we should have moved this expression out into the pre-header of the loop, in this particular case, the same place as x is equal to y times z. And if we do that and hoist that expression there, you can see that in the second side, now it becomes, one can eliminate this using total redundancy, because it is on the back edge available, it is on the front edge, it is also available, and we could therefore eliminate it across the two availability edges, which make it available inside, and get rid of it. And that's how we could effectively push this expression out into the pre-header here. And that's how we can get rid of the loop invariants here. Whatever expression is just sitting and evaluating again and again, we want to move it outside the loop. So you can see that the invariance, the loop invariant code motion, which is what is shown here, and the partial redundancy are pretty much handling the same thing. In addition, the partial redundancy is also available, trying to handle this other case, which the expression may or may not be inside a loop. Like in this case, we just are doing exactly same thing. We are covering this B plus C on this left-hand side here by putting it on right after this B is equal to B plus 1, and therefore covering wherever it was not available on that edge, we are putting that expression on that edge and covering it, and therefore we are eliminating it. So so partial redundancy would be the right way to do this, which is one technique. We don't want different kinds of techniques in compilers when one technique can really subsume the same case of a loop invariant code motion. We want to be able to do it. Although this is shown in this illustrations as A is equal to B plus C, what is really critical here is just the expression on the right hand side. B plus C's evaluation, that is the redundancy here, that B plus C is getting reevaluated. So remember again, the availability of expression is only about R values, and that's the same case over here. Now, let us first look how this was being done before the partial redundancy was solved. As I mentioned, partial redundancy, of course, detection of something being partially redundant. It's well known here that this was, of course, partial redundancy as a special case of partial redundancy inside a loop. And that one is, of course, another case of partial redundancy without any loop being involved. And detection of partial redundancy is, of course, very easy because all we are looking at is it is available along one edge and it is not available along at least one other edge. So that's the for detection. Partial redundancy is a very easy problem, but the main problem thing is this, that we are not just doing analysis here. Of course, the big goal of analysis is to drive the transformation to be able to improve the program and so on. So how do we eliminate it is really an issue. And you may say, oh, it's not very difficult. We just cover it. As you showed here, the edge which on which it is not covered, just go ahead and place it over there. Why it is so hard? You yourself have shown the position. Now you're taking a position. Maybe you're manipulating us in terms of showing a solution and then claiming that, oh, no, it is a hard problem. Is it some jugglery that you're trying here to cheat us or fool us? Of course not. So I would like you to think a little bit why this is not really the solution. It's just an illustration. It is not really a solution of placement for B plus C on the left-hand side edge, right, and the predecessor, or as shown over here in a simple manner. So give some thought why this could be a hard problem to really optimize, and that is really at the heart of why PRE remained an unsolved problem for some time. So while you think about that, I'm going to present the loop invariant code motion as the solution, the detection as well as the remediation. So what is really involved there is, of course, detection of loops. And after we have the loop, we are going to try and detect what is the invariant expression inside and then move that expression's evaluation at the in the pre-header of the loop. And that way we will not execute it over and over again. What is a pre-header? Pre-header is the one which is through which the loop is entered, and then the header is the one which along which the loop iterates. The header is the one on which you have the back edge and the loop iterates through that. So let's look at some of the things here in terms of what could cause an invariant inside a particular loop. Remember, it is again an R-value expression which we are talking about here. So the olden definitions, and there was a little bit of a sense of, hey, let's just move the whole statement outside the loop. But we will not take that view because we'll take a PRE view of it, which is again only R-value view. We don't have to really worry about the left-hand side. And several things have changed since this historic way. We are just looking at it for actually just understanding the significance of PRE. So let's just focus on the right-hand side expression, and it is loop invariant, as you can see, that the value is not really changing across the iterations if some of these things are true. So if the operands are constant, so obviously both of these operands are, if it has only one operand, it's a constant, so it's a question of constant expression, which is a very simple case. The second one is a little bit more tricky, and this is where the real loop invariant comes into picture. The reaching definitions are all outside the loop, which is the reason why this particular statement becomes an invariant. You can easily see that if we are getting the loop's values from all outside the loop, then that is going to create an expression And once those values come in, they are not going to change. So for example, in this particular earlier case, B plus C here, their values are coming from outside. B's value has come in from outside. C's value has come in from outside. And those values are not really going to change. And that's why B plus C will remain as the same value. Now, as I mentioned, when we enter pre-header, we could have different values of B coming in from different edges and so on. That's not the point. No matter which value we get in the pre-header, only that value enters the loop, that value iterates, executes, and does remain constant. So once we enter the loop, the value which participates in that computation remains the same. So, and that is characterized here by this all the definitions coming from outside the loop, whichever are the reaching definitions. That's the second case. And then the third case is the transitive case, which is inside the loop that somehow we generate an invariant inside such as A is equal to B plus C inside the loop. And you can see that because B and C are invariant, A is becoming an invariant. That is, A's value is also not changing. And now that A feeds onto next IR statement, let's say A plus C. And since A is invariant and maybe C's definition comes from outside, or is an invariant definition coming from the second case again, A plus C becomes an invariant and so on. So the transitive case of this that we have an expressions definition generation going on inside the loop, and that is being generated through the other invariant expressions feeding to this particular generation of an expression. That becomes the third case of an invariant. So look at this very carefully. You can see that we must have exactly one reaching definition. So, for example, I gave you the example of A is equal to B plus C. A becoming invariant. Let's say B and C are all coming outside from the loop, just as shown earlier, and A becoming an invariant. So A has become invariant here. Now let's say there is another A there, and that is also invariant inside the loop for similar reason. Let's say A is equal to some constant. But now the use of this A, if, for example, if it binds to both of these definitions, or the reaching definitions involve either A1 or A2, if that is the case, then that use of A will not contribute to an invariant. Remember that. Why is that? Because in one case it will be B plus C, one kind of execution. When that reaching definition carries the value of B plus C, the use of A there will consist of B plus C, or will correspond to B plus C. And in the second case, it will correspond to A is equal to some constant. Although there will be two non-varying definitions of A which will be going to that use of A, they will still be across the execution of the loop. They could differ. One could be B plus, one time it could be B plus C, second time it could be A is equal to constant, and because of which the participating value of A at that particular point will not remain constant to a one given value, and that is not an invariant. So that is why this definition, and that definition comes from an invariant statement. And transitively we could apply this, which could also, this also means, as you will see, that we could pick up these invariants by applying these things over and over again by just marking first those statements which have something like A is equal to C as invariants. Then going to the statements like B plus C, which are all have the reaching definitions coming from outside only. Okay. Again, the reaching definitions in this particular case, B plus C, they could all be B1, B2, B3 or C1, C2, C3. That's not the point, but of course, they're all coming from the outside the loop. So that's important distinction between second case and third case. And then once we have marked these base level invariants, we could pick up their transitive counterparts by applying the third rule, which mandates that we should have just exactly one loop originating reaching definition, which brings the value to this particular operation. And that should be marked as invariant. If we have multiple ones, and even though individually they might be marked as invariants, it will not lead to an invariant in the transitive sense here, for the reasons I mentioned. During some iterations, we'll see B plus C as the value of A, and during some others, we'll see A is equal to constant, and that means the value of A is fluctuating, and we will not be able to do anything with it. It is not really a invariant. So now we have again so far just done the analysis of invariants, these particular expressions that we have marked as invariant. And now what we want to do is to be able to move these values, these computations of these expressions rather, outside in the pre-header, just like what we showed in this particular case. We had this B plus C, and we try to put it in a non-iterative point over the place where the loop enters. Now remember that if we do this type of optimization, of course we detected here B plus C as an invariant, and we moved this over at the pre-header level, it will bind to the correct reaching definition of B and C, whatever that is, coming in dynamically, B1, B2, B3, C1, C2, C3, and it will of course generate the correct value, and then we'll feed that value. And as you notice here, we want to also be able to here move the left-hand side operand into the, which is A here, into the pre-header. The reason is this, that remember that in this definition of loop invariant, we have this reaching definition, and if A is generating that invariant into some other statement, such as A plus C, for example, having generated that A outside and then also moving the related statement A plus C into the loop pre-header is what the attempt is here for transforming the code in terms of moving the invariant computation in the pre-header. So far so good. So we have detected invariant, but now let's see whether we can move the invariant into the pre-header. So this is the algorithm which I was mentioning based on these previous observations. First, we mark all the constant operands and all the reaching definitions, and those statements are invariant. Then we'll go and look at all the reaching definitions, and only one reaching definitions inside the loop originating, then transitively we'll keep marking. So this marking is done now for all the operations inside the loop, and now we want to be able to, as I was mentioning, the problem was we have detected something as an invariant here, like X is equal to Y plus Z, and we want to be able to move this into the loop pre-header. Here is where some ad hoc ways, rather in the absence of any analysis and analysis time and some other historic artifacts, These were the rules which were designed for generating this motion of these invariants. So the first rule is this, and remember, analysis was what we call as demand-driven analysis. In other words, we have detected loops. We have detected what are the invariants with regard to those rules. Remember, the detection is very simple here. As you can see, the base cases here are, hey, just these reaching definitions. Are they all coming from outside the loop? Boom. If they are, that's the case, then that's an invariant. If that's a constant, that's an invariant. And then the third case is only needs loop analysis in terms of reaching definitions analysis within the loops. If one of the definitions, reaching definitions, however, is loop originating, and if that's the only one, then transitively mark these as invariant. So you can see here that no our external analysis per se is needed and is done in this particular case. Remember, in olden days, the analysis time was very, very precious. And loops were the most dominant executing parts of a software. Of course, they continue to be even now. And so this is what we call as demand driven. In other words, on demand, we analyze the loops, we improve the loops, and we move on. We detect the loop structure. Remember, I mentioned that we have dominator analysis and then loop detection and all that, just to figure out what are the regions where we will focus for optimization. And only on those regions we'll perform this analysis of whatever I showed earlier, reaching definitions, available expressions, and so on. So you have been given that kind of a problem in one of the homeworks to devise available expression analysis confined only to a loop. And this is an example of doing the reaching definition analysis only based on a loop for the invariants. So in short, no knowledge exists here in terms of what is going on outside the loop. Now, if that is the case, we have to be a little conservative here, and that really leads to this particular kind of restrictions. So the first thing is, remember now that the original point of evaluation where we had this S going on, which was x is equal to y plus z. Now we are moving this into a pre-header. Now imagine the first condition. This is legal only when the original point S dominated all the loop exits of the loop. Why is that the case? So let us look at it very carefully. What was going on in the original code when this S was sitting in the dominator node for all the exits. So the loop was executing, and before it exited to any of these outside nodes, it must go through the dominator node. So therefore it must execute x is equal to y plus z. And therefore it will carry the value of this x as y plus z. Now, if it did not dominate, then what will happen? That basically means that we could have an execution in which the control came into the loop. Since this does not dominate the exit nodes, the control flow potentially just exited to the exit nodes without ever going through this S or the statement which. So it went straight without going through this this particular node, and therefore the value of x that was seen at the exit node, let's say that x was used in that exit node. What was that value? Since it never went through this x is equal to y plus z, it is the value of x came into the loop from the top. So remember again what happened here. The control came into the loop through the pre-header. It went to the header, and it straight away went it followed some loop execution. but it never executed this particular statement because it is not a dominator. And somehow it never through the execution of this particular block. And without doing this s is equal to y plus z statement, which redefined x, by the way, it just exited into the exit node. So what value of x does that exit node see? It sees the value of x which came straight from the pre-header, which came from the outside the loop, and that's the reaching definition which it saw. Let's call that x1. Now what we did was we took this particular statement s, which was not sitting in a dominator, and we put it in the pre-header. Now what is going to happen? That this particular statement s is definitely going to execute. It is going to modify this x, and that reaching definition x1, which was coming in straight away going to the exit nodes, is now going to get modified by this x, and is going to get killed. And so the x1, which was the reaching definition originally for the exit node, is modified by this x. Let's call this as xs because it is originating in statement s. So the reaching definition which a node of exit node of the loop sees is xs and not x1, which was originally the case, and therefore it's a wrong value. So how do we ensure that is not the case? We ensure it making sure that s sits in a node which dominates all the exit nodes. If it does not even dominate even one exit node, we could have a path coming from the top of the loop carrying an initial definition of x, which is x1, and without going through xs, straight away go to that exit node carrying the value of x1 as reaching definition, and that value of x1 is the one which will be the value which will be used there. Now, having moved this into the pre-header, we have killed that definition, and therefore the loop is executing in a wrong way. So this is a conservative condition, as you can see. Why is it conservative? Because we don't know whether x was ever even used outside of this loop. So if x were not to be used in any of these loop exit nodes, then we are fine because there's no use of x. So what's the point of reaching definition getting modified there? But we don't know that because we have not analyzed this particular condition of whether x was used or not, and we have conservatively assumed it as per the first particular way of assuming that x was used because we are doing only the loop-oriented analysis here. We are not analyzing anything outside the loop of what is going on, which variables are being used, and so on. We have no knowledge of that. So we must conservatively assume that x was being used and therefore preclude the movement of this xs into the pre-header, assuming that x was being used. And we don't want to, of course, alter the reaching definition going there if x was not sitting in the dominator. If xs was were to be sitting in the dominator, we are just fine, because eventually you'll see the reaching definitions, whatever they are, from the entrance of the loop or the top of the loop, they'll all have to finally go through this dominator to be able to go to the loop exit node, and they will of course all get killed. The definition which will be reaching there will definitely be xs, and so by modifying this into the loop pre-header, we are not doing anything wrong as far as those are concerned. Now, there's another angle to it. Let's assume that we have some analysis about the usage of x outside the loop. That okay, we know that there is no use of this particular x outside. This particular, at least on some nodes, there is no use of this x on any one of these nodes, so we are good there. Now we moved this particular with regard to this with this knowledge in hand, we moved excess into the which was not in a dominator. Okay, now this is a case of where we are more aggressive. We know that excess is not XS is not used outside. There's no use of X outside. It's purely a local variable here. Now what we is, and that's not sitting in a dominator, so it need not execute before we leave the loop, in short. And since there is no use of XS outside the loop, and even though it is not sitting in a dominator node, we decide that, okay, since there is no use, it's safe, and so we simply move it outside into the pre-header. Now, data flow wise, it is safe. What's the catch here? Now you can see that since it was not sitting in a dominator, and we moved it into the pre-header, which is actually now a dominator, it will definitely execute. In the previous situation, it may have executed before the control exited the loop, but now this will be a definite execute. Even though it might be just once, it will definitely execute at least once. So there will be no correctness implication of this. However, what is the problem? It will unnecessarily execute. In other words, it will generate the value of X, even though nobody might be using X ever. And that is the problem which is handled in the PRE formulation also. So even if we have analysis, and if we were to try and move this using this particular condition, it really could lead to execution time increase here of moving it in one case, and in the second case being conservative without the knowledge of what is going on inside the loop. So with the knowledge, if we become aggressive, it might lead to increase in unnecessary execution of X in the pre-header. If we do not, of course, know anything, we become conservative, and we may not be able to move it unless it's in the pre-header. So how to tackle both of these kinds of conditions without really going through this knowledge of the loop and non-knowledge of the loop and things like that is really the basis for PRE. Now, this is one of the conditions. Now, let's look at the other conditions also, which are fairly easy to follow from these things. So the second condition is no other statement in the loop should assign to X. Again, you can see that the order of this XS and some other X2, which is sitting inside the loop, may be partial order. We are not really putting one execution before the other, and that's the program order in which it will play out. If the control goes to XS first, dynamically, it will generate that value and consume it. In other case, if it goes, it will generate that value and it will consume it through a given use of X. But now what is going on? We have moved this XS into the pre-header. So therefore, we ordered that XS is definitely generated every time before X2. And so if there is an execution which reaches X, in which we were supposed to dynamically get X2 during that execution, it may be so that it reaches the value of XS there, and that's wrong. And that's a safety condition because now the order of assignments is getting switched by saying that XS always happens before X2, and that's not acceptable. So in short, if we were to move XS into the pre-header, we must say that that's the only definition of X which sits inside the loop. And the third condition is pretty much the same as what restates what I just said, is no use of X in loop is reached by definition other than S. Obviously, we have we'll have, as I mentioned, a definition which is reaching when it should not be reaching a given use. There are multiple ones given the change from a partial order to a total order in terms of xs always getting generated before x2, and therefore that is also wrong. So these are little clumsy conditions. These were generated in the absence of a proper dealing of what is going on in terms of the flow of value, the use of values, etc. And they are safe, of course, if they are all satisfied, they are safe. They may be a little conservative, but they are safe given the way they are stated. By the way, the enforcement here, the way it was actually implemented, was simply about the dominator. The other case which I mentioned to you is just to illustrate the departure in terms of if we don't, even if we know outside the loop, how it may not be very helpful to avoid the replication. It was never implemented that way. The implementation was always at the bulleted points, that is the domination was the, and then the second one was no other assignment, and then no other use in the loop reached by anything other than S. So those were the three enforcements, which led to correct code and some moments of these whole of this statements into the preheader, but really speaking, they were not very good formulations in terms of everybody knew that this problem is really the partial redundancy, and that's where one should really try and use a clean way of generating these expressions values, cover it, and then get these values properly to the point of their redundancy. Because the essential problem, if you really see, is really redundancy. Invariance is just an effect of the problem, that it doesn't change the value, but the real problem is redundancy. And it was realized then also that that is the problem to focus on. So how to get rid of the root cause of the problem rather than the effect was always the focus of trying to change its implementation, and that's where the effort was. But unfortunately, how to tackle partial redundancy was not known, and that is the limitation which led to one tackling this problem as an invariance and then getting into all these clumsy ways of doing it. So before we proceed to partial redundancy, I would like to see if there are any questions. I hope it's clear that this, I hope the differences between the problem are clear. That is between partial redundancy and the loop invariance, and how these cases somehow tackle the invariance in a little clumsy way by notating these different conditions for safety without the analysis of the loop and outside the body of the loop, and historic solutions which were based on these. Are there any questions here? And let's pause for a minute, and if there aren't, then I will move to the PRE.
Professor, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So when we say that the statement S, it should dominate all the exit nodes of the loop. Suppose if we have something like a for loop or while loop for that matter. So according to the control flow of the while loop, there is a case where you exit from the header, right? In for loops, right? You go to, like, let's say you entered the loop, then you go around the blocks, then you go back to header, and then you exit from there. So in that case, so does it mean that the statement S should only be in the header of that loop because you're exiting from the header? Like,
yeah. So for example, just purely using the dominators here, if there is a path in which you come from pre-header to header and then test the condition there, and from there, if you are able to simply exit straight to a exit node, in that case, you will not be dominating. For example, you will not be going into the, let's say, loop body wherein we have S, And in that case, it will be unsafe to move it.
So in that case, unless we have a do-while loop where the loop body is guaranteed to execute once, so then it's
Yeah,
always unsafe?
either that, or you actually do some before you have the test in the exit test. You do have this excess sitting right there. That could be another case, right? So you come in the header, let's say, and you have excess sitting right there in the header. Okay, and then you do
Oh,
the condition. Yeah, so in that
okay.
case, it will still
Oh,
dominate,
okay.
right?
But in
So that
general, I
will
mean,
be
it
a
might be
case,
safe. So for
right?
normal cases, like for loop or while loop, it might be unsafe to move it if it's not in
Correct.
the header. Okay.
Correct. In
But
other
isn't this
cases, if it
limiting?
is sitting in the header and if that's the dominator, then it will still be safe.
Yeah, but that's limiting, right?
It
Here,
is
like,
limiting, yeah,
uh, okay.
it is limiting. And if, see, the other part of it is this, that even if you know, for example, that, there is no use of it, and there's only use which you have actually lifted outside the loop. Okay, so the reason why they are lifting it on a full statement by statement basis is x is equal to y plus z is that they want to lift that use also, and you have lifted it, taken care of a limited use case there. Okay, so you have pretty much taken care of the generation of x within the loop and its use also within the loop, and you lifted both um, in the pre-header and you have avoided. So that is the useful side of it when it will work well. The third one, in which you know that there are no uses outside, and it is not sitting in this particular case in your header. It's sitting maybe in the backage, maybe that node, right? Which is not really dominating, right? Because now you are able to simply bypass going to even once through the loop and go straight out. Okay, and you know that there is no use of this, which is the second part of this. And if you lifted it outside, in that case also, coming from um, a particular node, which is not really a dominator because there's no use now. So you loosen the condition and you lifted it. Now that is problematic too, because if you lifted it out of the back edge node, which loops back along the back edge, and it goes into the pre-header, and you never executed the loop, but you still execute now excess while going out. So you have some superfluous X computation there, and that's a bad case. It's not unsafe, but it's like, you're unnecessarily doing one extra operation there.
Yeah, that definitely that makes sense. And thank you, Professor. Yeah.
Yeah, so those are the ones which are actually, so these arbitrary cases, doing in this way, why do it this way? So when there's a very clean way, which will tackle all of it, as you will see in PRE and more. And that is, and I think this is the problem was here, the main problem which we faced in this formulation is we define this as loop invariant detection and motion, and that's not the right definition of a problem. The right definition of a problem is redundancy. Having to recompute the same expression over and over again for no reasons, and once we impose that definition, then it becomes a PRE problem, and that's when we got to find a solution using that formulation. And so when we change the formulation, and when we change, of course, this underlying solution, we got exactly everything in right places. You see? So that's what is going on here, roughly. Any other questions before we move? I wanted to bring this out, this clumsy data flow and all these conditions and so on, because you'll see that this is one root cause of not formulating the problem, and we learned a lot from this. And it forced us to go on another path and do research and get that problem solved well, first of all, number one. Number two is it led to a very clean formulation in PRE itself, which we'll get into now. So let's go there and let's look at that formulation and how this tackles all of this. So okay, so now back to square one. We have looked at what is a PRE problem. That is, very precisely, we are at a given basic block. We are in a given basic block, and we know that the expression is available on one of the incoming edges and is not available on another incoming edge. At least one of the incoming edges, it is not available. Okay, let's put it that way. And because of this reason, we cannot eliminate it in that basic block and get rid of the redundancy. That is the problem. So detection, as I mentioned earlier, was not difficult, but remediation was pretty hard. And I want you to go back to what we showed earlier and think. I hope you have sort of completed some thinking here in terms of why is it not just enough to go back on that edge and just put that expression for covering the non-availability. Like, let me go back here. Like in this particular case, I hope you're getting what I'm saying. And what I'm saying here is this, that look at this. I hope you can see my cursor. The example on the left-hand side, we had this partial redundancy. On the right-hand side, we have the availability. On the left-hand side, we do not have availability. So what we did in this particular case, quickly showed this expression b plus c, recomputed it in this example after b is equal to b plus 1. And voila, we are done. We can now get rid of this partial redundancy for b plus c, eliminate it using the values coming from both sides. Now my question is this, forget about b is equal to b plus 1, which kind of is the real key here. If we did not have it, okay, let's assume that there's nothing, no change to b occurring there at that particular point. It occurred somewhere earlier probably. Is it still good idea to just go to that point and place b plus c for covering it right in the predecessor and locally solve PRE problem, or is there a problem about that part? And of course, the answer is there is a problem about the placement of b plus c right on the predecessor edge. The effect is shown there in terms of non-availability, but if you place it into b plus c, what could happen? You simply change the problem of partial redundancy from this bottom of the block to that block where you have newly placed b plus c. Why? Because it is not available in the top block where you have b plus c now currently placed. It was not available there. But what does non-availability mean? Non-availability means that maybe while coming into this block, it was partially available on some of these incoming edges and was not available, was available on some edges and was not available, therefore leading to non-availability in the predecessor. So by placement there, you still have a partial redundancy now in the previous basic block, not on the green one. And that is why you cannot place it on the predecessor. Is that clear? Any questions about this important part? That for solving partial redundancy, we cannot simply go to the predecessor and cover the expression on the predecessor basic block. If you get this, then you will get partial redundancy completely everywhere. Why is this not solving the problem if we place it in this way? The reason is this: wherever we have placed it on the right after b is equal to b plus 1 now, that is not the right place for it. Forgetting, of course, b is equal to b plus 1. Forget that part. If it were not there, in general, I'm talking about just moving b plus c and covering it on the predecessor basic block. That does not work. That does not solve PRE problem. Reason is it is not available in the previous basic block, and therefore the reason behind it may be that it is available along certain path coming into that basic block. It is not available along certain other path, and so it is partially available there or partially redundant there. Now you simply change the partial redundancy from the bottom block, the join block, to a left-hand side block, and that's not solving the problem. Any questions about this part before we move? Okay, good. So if that is clear, then where is the placement point for these b plus c so that we cover it properly? That is the question which PRE addresses in a very elegant and clean way, and that's what we'll see now. Okay, the PRE is a little tricky topic, but we'll go slowly and we'll make sure we address all the questions that you may have. And it is really very interesting topic in terms of we are going to actually drill down quite a bit on this topic. We have given homework on this, and we also will probably do a little bit more there. Okay, so let's quickly look at the history of partial redundancy. The problem has been well known in one of those famous papers by Morel and Renvoy in CACM, and several people have tackled these PRE problems since in research literature. Some really big names in this list, very well-known names and compilers have tried and solved this problem. One of them happened to be from my alma mater, IIT Bombay. Proudly had a chance to really learn this topic from him, Professor Dhamdhere, who was one of the pioneers of this topic as well. Mainly the difficulty about this particular problem was this, that to solve it in terms of a placement problem, it was for a very long time thought that we had to solve two bidirectional problems simultaneously. One is forward and one is backward, and that leads to a huge solution time. And then the second problem was this, that we want to have a solution in which we are really getting rid of the redundancy, but we are not trying to introduce some expressions where they shouldn't be there. In other words, no path is lengthened. This particular version of PRE was even harder. And what does that mean? That means that look at that example which I talked about in the loop invariant code motion. This is one classic example of that. If we move this expression into the pre-header and the control straightaway goes to the exit node without was going ever through this expression in the original code, then because of the moment you are executing this expression unnecessarily, and that lengthens the path over there, and that's not acceptable in the PRE versions. So these two hard problems, one was how to solve this problem in a bidirectional way without really complex algorithms. And second is the guarantee that no path is lengthened. That was the second one. And the third one is obviously optimization benefit. So this is the third part, which is what we call as lazy code motion. So as you can see here, in the PRE's solution, there are several points at which a particular expression can be placed potentially to cover in a proper way without introducing partial redundancy. But which of them is the best point in terms of code generation and optimization? That was the third one, which was not, again, very well thought through. And it should be as late as possible. That is, the coverage should be close to the original point of evaluation, which is being removed by the redundancy, as close to it as possible, as late as possible, which is called as a lazy code motion. That was the third problem. Now, all these different pieces of problems have been tackled, and the credit really goes to all these people who are in this list here, a very highly distinguished list. But the latest one, for our purposes, what we are going to look at is lazy code motion, formulation of the problem. The other formulations are a little difficult to understand. So we are going to look at this. And then even this one was simplified in terms of its presentation by Dreckler and Stradell. I have put both the papers by Knoop as well as Dreckler and Stradell on this thing. So we'll be looking at this particular formulation. Let us make some introductory remarks about PRE today, and that topic is fairly interesting. So we'll of course cover it completely in the next lecture. We will introduce a few things today. So what is really going on here is this, that the main problem, as you know, is because of partial availability of the results of expressions, sub-expressions. Now, what does that mean? That means that if you are coming from one edge, the expression is available, and the second edge, it is not available. And the essential problem of PRE is to cover this expression, as I've been mentioning, along the edge along which it is not available. The expression is not available. Now, how to cover it? That is the key problem in terms of the solution here. Where to cover it? Should we just do it in the previous basic block? Should we go to the basic block even before that? Should we keep going up before, up the control flow graph? Where should we really cover it? That is the real question. And that is really solved by the PRE. So that is the central formulation of the problem. Any questions about that? We have a partial redundancy again at a given basic block. We have an expression x plus y being evaluated there. It is available along one of the incoming edges, but not along the other. And so what we want to do is cover x plus y along the non-available edge. Now, if we just go to the predecessor block and place x plus y there, that could be problematic, because again, the same problem could arise there, that hey, x plus y was generated in one of the incoming paths to that block, and it wasn't available along the other path. And so we simply moved the problem to the previous block from the current block. So that's not the right one. So then we keep going back, and we should cover it maybe on the incoming edges to that block or what. And we will decide the right place to put the expression to cover its non-availability. That's one of the paths. Now, where do we really stop? We get stopped because of one of the two conditions. One is a simple one to understand, which is what we look at first. And then the other condition is really coming out of the going into a path in which we should not be really going. So, okay, so the first condition, we are trying to again cover B plus C, and we are going back to get rid of the partial availability issue. Where do we stop? We stop when we cannot go up, as simple as that. Look at this. When do we have to stop? B plus C here, we had to place only in this particular way, right after B is equal to B plus 1. That is, we cannot go up more than the modification point for one of the operands. Because what will happen? If we place B plus C above B is equal to B plus 1, what value of B will be using there? We'll be using old value, stale value, and not the modified definition of B, and that is wrong. So where we are stopped in terms of going up and up and up is the place at which the non-availability of expression becomes the cause. Why is the expression non-available? Because it was killed. It was killed as per the availability framework when B was redefined. It need not be that B is equal to B plus 1. It could be simply redefinition of B to whatever. After this particular point, the expression B plus C is no longer available. And so therefore, we cannot place the coverage before this point of redefinition of the B. So that is one of the stopping points for going backwards. Now, the other stopping point comes into picture because of we don't want to elongate any path of PRE. And what will happen is if we keep going back, it could be that we are at a given point in which we are not really going to see any execution of this particular expression further down from there. So in case of the second condition that we want to impose here, no path is lengthened, what do we must have? We must have the condition that if we go above this particular point, maybe some path is elongated. What does that basically mean? That means that if we go along that some path, there was no evaluation of expression in that first place, but now you have inserted an evaluation of an expression in the path when it was not there, and that's the second stopping condition. The second stopping condition is exactly mirrored by the very busyness of that expression at that particular point. In other words, if we go to a point above where the expression ceases to be very busy, okay, note this very carefully. So the expression was very busy at a given control flow point. That means that from there, whichever direction we went, we had an evaluation of that particular expression sitting there. So in each of these paths, we had seen that there was an evaluation of this particular expression. We were good there. But let's say we go up now one level above. What happens? From there, suddenly another path starts. How does it start? Because from the predecessor basic block, now we suddenly have a condition that we can go in another direction, another path starts there, another edge is there, along which there was no evaluation on that expression. So it is not very busy at the predecessor basic block. So if it was very busy in a given successor basic block, but not very busy in the predecessor one, we cannot go to the predecessor one, because if we place the expression there for coverage, suddenly we are going to encounter a path in which now the expression is superfluous. It wasn't really intended to be executed along that path because it was not very busy. So that is the second stopping condition in the backward sense, where we cannot go above this. So what we'll do is we'll keep sweeping backwards to find out where we can start earliest in terms of the coverage of an expression. The earliest point will be defined by we cannot move above this particular point because the expression's value will change, or will introduce some superfluous execution in that path, and from there we will try a placement. That is one part of it. If we determine such points where we do the placement and provide the adequate coverage, we are actually done with PRE right then and there. But that's not the formulation that is really practical. So what is practical then? Having decided those points which are adequate for coverage, we will start moving the placement closer and closer to a latest point, which is closest to the original execution which we are removing, and we'll place it as late as possible from there, and that is what is called as lazy code motion. So two things, we'll sweep backwards as early as possible to provide the coverage, because if we do not do it, we'll leave some redundancy intact and we wouldn't have solved the problem properly. So that's the first reason for it. Just like I showed it that the predecessor is a wrong placement point, you can extrapolate the arguments and go to their predecessors and simply construct an example in which non-availability means partial availability or could mean partial availability, and therefore is not the right placement point. So that means that go even more backwards. And so the stopping point here will be, we cannot move any more backwards because of the data flow, because we would generate wrong values of expressions, as I showed in this b is equal to b plus 1 example. That's one case. Second case is if we move a little bit even up, even though that may not be the stopping condition. The second one could be that we are placing it in a path in which it is superfluous, it wasn't supposed to be there in that path, and that violates the second condition of no path should be made longer, and that's the stopping condition. So those are the points where we would have placed it earliest to remove partial redundancy with regard to these constraints. However, those will not be the right points, because what will happen is, imagine evaluating these expressions way early there in the control flow, holding their values in some temporary or in some register and feeding it to the point of their original evaluation. We will have very long live ranges there, and that will really kill the purpose of PRE as an optimization. It will create tremendous register pressure, and it will not really lead to any good optimization. So what we will do is we'll then start pushing it down as much as possible and place it at the latest possible point. So in general, this is what PRE does. And it is formulated now in terms of the exact equations. So with this background, in the next lecture on Monday, we will look at how the equations really formalize what I just said, and try to decide earliest placement. What we are going to look at, the earliest placement, which is characterized by these different sets, which are based on some sets that we already know actually. Anticipatability or the very busyness, the same set, availability of an expression. Using these sets, we'll construct where the earliest placement of the expression could start for getting rid of all the partial redundancy within a region. And then we will work on how to keep syncing it as late as possible, and then where is the point where it should be really placed, and things like that. Now, this is such an interesting problem that one of the last things that I want to just mention about this problem is that this is a problem which is really formulated as an edge problem, edge-based problem. In other words, we have seen earlier data flow problems as being at the entrance and exits of the blocks and so on, but not here. The main reason is this, that we want to do this placement of this expression. In this particular case, you look at the rightmost example. Why it is important to do an edge-based placement here. If we do the placement going back to on the rightmost side to BI, you can immediately see that it creates some issues because of some path from BI to BK being elongated because of this placement, on which there was no original placement of or original evaluation of this expression. Now, on the other hand, if we move it to BJ, it might create some issue of partial redundancy, because what if the expression is available on the BH side of the house? So for solving this problem, we had no other choice except to cut the edge there between BI and BJ and place the expression there for solving the problem. And because if we put it in BJ, that's actually just useless because it's available on the BJ edge, and so it is not really solving the problem. If we go to BI, on the other hand, it creates the longer path from BI to BK, because along that path there was no original evaluation of this expression. So it violates the condition of no path should be elongated. So we have no other choice except cutting this in the red box and placing that particular expression there, and that will provide the right coverage. You may ask the question that yes, it might lead to some jumps and other issues in the control flow, and that is true. In terms of practical code generation, you can see that now there will be one more jump there, an unconditional one. But fortunately, there are compiler techniques, especially dealing with unconditional jumps is not difficult. We can do some ordering of the jump and so on, and fill in its slots, and that way we can take care of latencies there. If it's a conditional jump, it's harder. So the penalties imposed because of the edge cutting are not bad. They are tackled in subsequent stages of code generation. Sorry, I went a little over time. We'll stop here. Thank you. If you have any questions about so far high-level parts of PRE, I'll be happy to take those in office hours, and see you next week otherwise. And we will cover the detailed of PRE in depth using these equations and so on. So thank you. See you in office hours.